We are going to be working with objects, and you're also going to learn about includes, and we will be covering PHP, string, and date functions. So first, we're going to start with objects in PHP, and a lot of you guys are already familiar with how to code classes and how to derive a new class from a base. So we're just going to cover how to do this in PHP. In PHP, a class is a programmer-defined data type, and basically it's kind of a blueprint for creating an object. When you define the class, you are defining the features, and the features become the properties. You are also going to be defining different actions that you can take on those features, and those actions become the functions. And when functions are part of a class, they are called methods. So I do have a little example here of a superhero class. And to create a class, you have to use the keyword class followed by whatever you're going to call it. Then you're going to give it the properties, which are the variables that are tied to the object. And you'll notice we made all of ours public so that they could be populated with data. And then we have a constructor. The default constructor that initializes the variables is kind of built in. This constructor accepts data when the object is created. And what's a little unusual is that the word construct has two underscores before it. So it's underscore underscore construct. That is how you have to create it. So it's public function, two underscores and a construct. And then in parentheses is the data that is being passed when the object is created. Then we take this data and we assign it to the different properties. This refers to the current object. Now, normally in most languages, you'll have this dot and then the property. Okay? In PHP, you'll notice that it's an arrow instead of a dot. So we have this arrow name, that's referring to this property up here, and we're just filling it in with the name that was passed. And then we have this arrow power, and we are filling it in with the power that was passed. Okay? And this is all done when the object is created and data is passed. Then down at the bottom, we have a little function called greet. And because this function is part of a class, it becomes a class method. And all this is doing is it is returning a text string, basically indicating what the name is, indicating what the superpower is, and all that fun information. Okay, so this is our class. And when we create an object, we are creating an instance of the class, which means we're creating one superhero. Okay. If we had a different class, let's say we had a house and we created one house, we would have an instance of house, which is one object. If we did another house, we would have two objects. If we did a third house, we'd have three objects. Back to our superhero example. This would be how we would create a new superhero. So arrow becomes an object. Arrow is equal to a new superhero. So superhero is a class, and we're creating a new instance. So that indicates it's an object. This is the data that is being passed. Where is it being passed to? It's coming up into the constructor. Okay, so we create a superhero. It's coming in here. So Oliver Queen becomes the name. Trick arrows is the power. Green arrow is the alias. Billionaire businessman is the occupation. And we take this data and we assign it to the different properties. And we're basically populating our object. You'll notice here that we take the object, which is arrow, and we call the greet method. And it's part of an echo statement, so it's going to return this long text string and basically print it out. And then we've got another one called bird, which is a second object. And then we print out the data for bird. Here is another example. This is a store class with 3 properties. Here's the constructor. And then for this one, we have an info method, which is returning a text string. And then down here, we're creating an ABC object. And then we are calling the info method. And we're creating an Arnie's or Amy's object and calling the info method with Amy's. So what's a little different about PHP is the fact that instead of dots, we have to use the arrow. Okay. Also, for the constructor that accepts past data, the name is construct and it begins with 2 underscores. That's a little different than other languages. Yeah, PHP does allow inheritance, and you basically extend the base class to create a new derived class. So if we're going to use store as the base, this is an example of a derived class where we take toy store, which is our new one, and we're extending store. So you still begin with the keyword class, followed by toy store extends store. The great thing about inheritance is that you only have to declare the new properties. The original properties that were part of store are also part of toy store. Okay, so toy store includes all of the new properties, which is toy name, description, and retail, plus it also includes name, type, and city. Okay, and so in our constructor, we have to pass all of the data, not only for toy store, but we also have to pass the data for store. So there's a lot of parameters that are being passed in. What we do with the store parameters, and you can see it's store : 2 underscores construct. This calls the base constructor and passes name, type, and city. So what happens is it comes up here with name, type, and city, and it sets those properties because they're part of the base. Then for the new stuff that is only part of Toy Store, we set that in here. What's unusual about PHP, okay, this is pretty normal for deriving classes. Almost every language does it this way. But what's unusual for PHP is in our info method, we not only have access to the new properties, we also have access to the base. So you'll see this dot or this arrow name, this arrow city, those 2 are coming from store. Okay, and then we've got toy name and retail. Those are coming from Toy Store. So in info, we're able to pull properties from the base and the derived class. That is a little unusual. Okay, most methods are kind of handled just like our constructor. So this example puts everything together. We've got the base and we have the derived class all in the same program. And then down here, you can see we're creating base objects and we're displaying the data. And we're also creating derived class objects and displaying the data. You will be doing something almost identical to this in the assignment. And I don't include this example on the assignment page, so you're going to want to make sure you come back here as a reference. Then we're going to cover working with strings, dates, and time. So printf is something that we have looked at before. We'll take another quick look at it because it's a little different, but it's how we get columnar printout in PHP. So we give it a format control string and we also give it variables. This control string can have text, but for each variable whose value you want printed, you need to have a conversion specifier. And there are 3 that you are going to use. There is %d, which is for whole numbers, %f, which is for decimals, and %s, which is for text and characters. Okay, so it's %d, f, and s that you will use. Then to get nice columns or to control the size, you can give it a figure for the number of characters that you want printed, or if it runs out of data, it pads it with spaces. So for the integer, it's % followed by a number and d. So this %10d will pad with spaces if the number is not 10 digits long. And %10f would do the same thing. Now we said that f also allows decimal places. So if you want to specify decimal places, not only do you have to give it a width, you also have to put in a period followed by the number of decimal places. So this is 10 numbers wide and 2 decimal places. For strings, it is similar. If you had a string that was 10 characters or less, you do %10s. If you want things left aligned, you put in a minus sign. By default, your data is going to be right aligned. You can change the alignment by putting the minus sign before the number and after the % sign. So I do have a little example similar to something that you're going to have to do in the assignment. You can see that I've got name, address, city, state, zip. Those are all variables that I filled in with values, and then I'm printing them out. And to get the printout kind of in a nice little address format, you'll notice that I am utilizing the printf with the conversion specifiers. And so I've got -30s, which is 30 characters, and I'm left aligning. So I'm allowing 30 characters on the line, and I'm throwing everything over to the left side. And I'm doing the same thing with address. Then for city, I'm allowing 15 characters, and it's left aligned. And for state, I'm allowing 4 characters, and it's left aligned. Now, state's only going to be 2 characters. So there's automatically going to be 2 spaces on the right-hand side of state. And then for zip code, it's going to be 5 characters, and it's going to end up being right aligned. Okay, so printing with those conversion specifiers gives you some nice looking output. You'll notice I put in line breaks for name and address. I didn't for city, state, and zip because those all need to be on the same line. Then this table is just showing you what the conversion specifiers are. The first 3 are the ones that you are going to use. You are not going to use %C. In some languages, that is used for a single character. However, in PHP, it interprets it as the ASCII equivalent. So the number 50 would have an ASCII equivalent of 2. And there is no reason for you guys to print out ASCII equivalents. So that is not something that you're going to use. You are either going to use %F, %D, or %S. Sprintf. So this is like a regular printf, but you are saving it to a variable instead of displaying it on the screen. So you can look at it as saved printf, okay? And what it saves is what you would see on the screen. So in this example, animal is mimic octopus. So this little phrase here, what it's going to do is replace %S with mimic octopus. So this whole sentence is going to end up getting stored in text. And then here we're displaying it. So if you had text that you needed to display later on, this would make sense, especially if you wanted to be able to format it and pull in data from variables and save that with your text. Include and require statements. So in your assignment, you're going to have to do 2 include statements. And basically, all it does is it allows you to pull in code from another PHP file. So for things like copyright and addressing and menus, things that you use over and over again, makes total sense to put it in a separate file and use an include to bring it into your current program. The difference between include and require is that if there's a problem, require is going to give you a fatal error, and that will stop your program from running. Include gives you a warning. So in your assignment, I'm going to have you guys use include instead of require. And so your assignment, you're almost going to do something identical to this, where you are going to create a footer file. This is called footer.php. And here I've just got some copyright information. And you'll see it's got the opening and closing PHP. And then I'm pulling it into a completely separate file in one PHP include statement. Okay, and then here's a menu example. This is the entire file. The name of it is menu.php. And you can see in between the nav tags is where I'm pulling that in. And that brings me to string functions. So in your assignment, you're going to have to pick 2 of these and use them. And we're going to be using some of the more advanced ones when we get into form handling. The string functions are used extensively in word processing. You can see this first example is using string length. And basically, it's got a little for loop. And we are using the length to figure out how long the string is. And then we're subscripting into the string. And we're printing out 1 letter on each row. So string length gives us the length. That is what it is designed to do. And it works really well if you, for some reason, wanted to access every single letter in the string. String. Basically, this lets you search a longer string for a letter or a phrase. Okay, and W3 Schools has a little example here. And you can see that this is the longer string, and this is what it's searching for, and that is what it ends up displaying. So once it hits what it's searching for, then it's going to display. So we can actually add some text after this and run it, and then that's what you see from that point on. Okay, and then we've got string position. And this is going to give you the last occurrence of a string inside of another string. Okay, so here I got row, row, row your boat. I'm looking for the word row. So it's going to give me the location, the position of that last string. And then here I've got another example. This is the Jackson 5 ABC song, and you can see ABC and 1, 2, 3 are repeated all over the place. And that's in an include file. So here I am pulling in the file, storing it in song, and then I'm looking in song for 1, 2, 3. So it's going to give me the position of the last occurrence, which should be right here. Okay? And that ends up being position 148. Okay, and then substring works exactly how you would think it does, same as other languages where you have a string, you give it a starting position and the length that you want returned. So here I've got my song. I'm going to start at position 20 and I'm going to return 68 characters. So this is what it ends up returning. strtoke is what I have in my example for the assignment. Basically, this will take a string and you can split the string on something called a token. And the token is quite often like a period. And so here I have a variable called story that I set equal to a story. And you'll notice that every sentence ends in a period. And so I set up token using strtoke, and we are looking for the periods. And then I get into this little loop where it's going to stay in the loop as long as it finds a period. So what it does for the first one is it grabs everything up to the first period. And here I'm just displaying that text and 2 line breaks after. And then it's looking for the next period. So it's going to grab this little section up until the period. Okay. And then it displays it with 2 line breaks. And then it grabs this section, displays it with 2 line breaks. And then it grabs this section and displays it with 2 line breaks. And now there are no more tokens. So it's done with the loop. So here you can see this is what it looks like when it's all done. And that is what I used for one of my string functions. Then we've got 2 upper and 2 lower. And you can either use them and store the results in a variable, or if you wanted, in a print statement, you could actually use it here and then not store it. You can just have the returned uppercase print right out. Just depends on what you want to do. Then we get into number format. So in a lot of word processing, your numbers are actually text. And so number format will pull it in and convert it into an actual number. So here is where you'd have your number string or the variable that contains it. And decimal places, decimal point, and separator are all optional. Parse string. So when we get into form processing, a lot of queries that you do online in like Google and other search engines end up showing the query up on the address bar. Also in a form, if you use method equal get, that shows up on the address bar. And so parse string looks for the ampersand, okay, and it looks for the variable equal to another variable, and it breaks it apart. So it's going to take, in this case, NMC, store it in store, take CIT, stores it in major, okay? And you can see that's what ends up printing out. We will be using this when we get into form handling. The next set of functions, trim, ltrim, rtrim, and strip tags, are also something that we're going to be using when we get into form handling. Trim removes white space on the left and the right of a variable. Ltrim removes it on the left only. Rtrim removes it on the right. And strip tags gets rid of HTML and other undesirable characters that are in your text or your entry area. And we will be using all of those when we get into cleaning our data that comes from a form. because we're going to be eventually updating database files, and we need to make sure the data is clean before we put it in a database. Strip tags is another one that we will be using. I think I mentioned this already. It basically cleans the data. Substring replace. This will let you replace text if you give it a starting point and how many characters you want to replace. You can specify the new text and the original string. Okay, so in this case, it's going to count over 5 and look at the next 8 characters, which is backyard, and replace it with land. String replace is like a replace all in a word processor. So it's going to look at the entire string. It's going to look at what you want replaced, and what you want to find, what you want to replace in the entire string, and then it'll give you a count as to how many it changed. So here, instead of this land is your land, I have this backyard as your backyard. What I want it to look for is backyard. I want it to replace it with land. The variable name is song, and then I want a count. Okay, and then I just print out how many replacements were made. Word wrap. So the default when you wrap text is for it to keep words together. Okay, you can say, what your maximum width is, and then you can tell it if you want words kept together or not. So here I've got a little string. This is a very long word. It is a real word, anti-disestablishmentarianism. Okay. And so we're using word wrap, and we're saying we want each line to be 10 characters long. Putting true at the end will split this long word. The default, if you don't put anything at the end, is not to split apart a word. Okay, so it just depends on how you want it to look. This next one basically looks for the /n, which basically means a carriage return, and it replaces it with an HTML line break, because that's basically what a carriage return is. So everywhere that we have a carriage return in here, it's going to end up inserting the BR line break command, and this is how the output ends up looking. Finally, we have explode. So what explode does is it looks at your string, and then it looks at a separator that you have specified, and it splits the text into different elements within an array. So here's the story. It's going to look for /n. And so each little section ends up going into a different array element. Okay, and just so you could see this, I did explode, and I have it printing out. So you can see in subscript 0, I have this little phrase, which is right before the /n. And then in subscript 1, it threw in this little phrase, subscript 2, it has this phrase, and so on. So for your assignment, you need to pick 2 of the string functions and use them. That brings me to date and time. So you're going to first have to create the date or time. So you can use date, create, or time, and then you're going to want to format it some way. So you can see that we've got today equals date create, and if we just print it as is, kind of shows you what it looks like. And then you can see we have kind of a nifty little date format command. So you have to create your date, and we're storing it in today. And then you take that today variable and you apply formatting to it. So these letters represent the different ways you can format the date. So the capital D is the 3-character day of the week. Capital F is the full month. Lowercase d is the numeric day of the month. Uppercase Y is the century year. And you can see that is how that date gets formatted. Okay, and here's another example of a format that includes time. So in your assignment, you're going to have to pick 2 date functions. So the first one is going to be to create either the date or time, and then you're going to want to format it some way. Okay, so as far as the functions that you pick, totally up to you. Okay, and the next video will go over the assignment.